Section 16 of the Convivio. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by K. Hand. The Convivio by Dante Alighieri, translated by Philip H. Wicksteed. Treatise 4, chapters 10 through 13. Chapter 10. Now that the opinions of others concerning nobility have been laid down, and it has been proved that I am free to refute them, I shall come to the discussion of that part of the Ode which contains this refutation, and it begins, as said above, he who defines man is a living trunk. And so be it known that the opinion of the Emperor, although he set it down defectively, did in one phrase, to wit where he said gracious manners, really hit some part of the ways of nobleness, and therefore there is no thought of refuting it there. It is the other phrase, which is absolutely foreign to the nature of nobleness, that there is thought of refuting. For it seems to indicate two things when it speaks of ancient wealth, to wit time and riches, which are utterly foreign to nobility, as I have already said, and as I shall prove below. And therefore the refutation falls into two parts. First, riches are rejected, and then time is rejected, as causes of nobleness. The second part begins, nor will they have it that a base man can become gentle. Be it known that to reject riches is to refute not only that part of the Emperor's opinion that indicates riches, but the whole of the opinion of the vulgar herd, which was based on riches alone. The first part is divided into two, for in the first it is asserted generally that the Emperor was wrong in his definition of nobility; in the second it is shown the reason why, and this second part begins, for riches cannot, as is held. I say then, he who defines man is a living trunk. Firstly speaks not the truth, that is to say speaks false, in so far as he says trunk, and then not the whole thing, that is to say speaks it defectively, in so far as he says living and does not say rational, which differentiates men from beasts. Then I say that in like manner did he who held empire err in his definition, and I say not emperor but who held empire, to indicate that, as said above, deciding this question is beside the imperial office. Then I say that he erred in like manner, because he laid down a false subject of nobility, namely ancient wealth, and then proceeded to a defective form, or differentiating principle, to wit gracious manners, which do not comprehend the whole formal principle of nobleness, but a very small part of it, as will be shown below. And we are not to overlook, though the text says naught about it, that in this matter Messer the Emperor not only erred in the phrases of his definition, but also in his mode of defining, although fame proclaims him to have been a great logician and clerk. For the definition of nobleness would be more suitably drawn from its effects than from its sources, inasmuch as it appears itself to have the character of a source, which cannot be made known by the things that precede it, but by the things that follow from it. Then when I say, for riches cannot, as is held, I show that they cannot cause nobleness, because they are base, and I show that they cannot take it away, because they are completely severed from nobleness. And I show that they are base by one very great and manifest defect that they have, and this I do when I say, that they be base is apparent, and the rest. Finally I conclude by virtue of what is said above, that the upright mind is not changed by their translation, which proves what was said above, viz. That they are severed from nobleness, because the effects of union do not follow. And here be it known that, as the Philosopher has it, whatever things produce anything the latter must needs first exist perfectly in the being of the others. Wherefore he says in the seventh of the Metaphysics, when one thing is generated by another, it is generated by it in virtue of existing in its being. Further we are to know that everything which is destroyed because of some preceding change, and anything which is affected must needs be some way connected with that change, as the Philosopher has it in the seventh of the Physics and in the first of Generation. These things laid down, I thus proceed and say that riches cannot, as folk suppose, confer nobility, and to show their still further remoteness from it, I add that they cannot take it away from him who has it. They cannot give it, inasmuch as they are naturally base, and by reason that baseness is contrary to nobility. And here baseness means degenerateness, which is opposed to nobleness, inasmuch as one contrary does not nor cannot produce the other, for the reason above stated, and all this is briefly appended to the text in the words, further, who paints a figure, unless himself can be it, cannot set it down. Wherefore no painter could set down any figure unless he had first in intention become such as the figure is to be. Further, They cannot take it away, because they are remote from nobleness. And for the reason stated above, whatsoever modifies or destroys anything must needs be connected with it, and therefore it adds. Nor is an upright tower made to lean by a river that flows far away. Which means to utter naught else than a parallel to what was said before, namely that riches cannot take away nobleness, speaking as though this nobleness were an upright tower, and as though riches were a river flowing far away from it. Chapter 11. It now remains only to prove how riches are base, and how they are disconnected and remote from nobleness, and this is proved in two clauses of the text, to which attention must now be given, and then when they have been expounded what I will have said will be evident, to wit, that riches are base and remote from nobleness, and thereby the arguments against riches urged above will be perfectly established. I say then, that they be base and imperfect is apparent. And to prove that which it is my purpose to express, be it known that the baseness of a thing flows from its imperfection, and its nobleness from its perfection. Wherefore the more perfect a thing is, the nobler is it in its nature, and the more imperfect the baser. And so if riches are imperfect, it is clear that they are base. And that they are imperfect the text briefly proves when it says, For how much soever gathered, they can give no quiet, but multiply care. Wherein is manifest not only their imperfection, but also that their condition is most imperfect, and therefore that they are most base. And to this Lucan testifies when he says, addressing them, Without resistance did the laws perish, but ye riches, the basest part of things, stirred battle. Briefly, their imperfection may be seen clearly in three things. First, in their undiscerning advent; secondly, in their perilous growth; thirdly, in their hurtful possession. And before I prove this, a difficulty that seems to rise must be explained. For inasmuch as gold and gems have perfect form and act in their own being, it seems untrue to say that they are imperfect. And therefore be it known that they themselves, in themselves considered, are perfect things, not riches however, but gold and gems. But so far as they are designed for the possession of man, they are riches, and in this sense they are full of imperfection, for there is no inconsistency in one and the same thing under different aspects being both perfect and imperfect. I say that their imperfection may be noted firstly in the want of discernment in their advent, wherein no distributive justice shines, but absolute iniquity almost always; which iniquity is the proper effect of imperfection. For if we consider the ways in which they come, all may be gathered into three fashions. For either they came by pure fortune, as when without intention or hope they come by some unsought discovery; or they come by fortune, supported by reason, as by testament or by mutual succession; or they come by fortune aiding reason, as in lawful or unlawful gains. By lawful I mean the earnings of art or trade or service; by unlawful I mean theft or plunder. And in each of these three modes that iniquity of which I speak may be observed, for hidden wealth which is discovered or rediscovered oftener presents itself to the bad than to the good, and this is so obvious that it needs no proof. Indeed, I have seen the place on the ribs of the mountain in Tuscany called Falterona, where the basest churl of the whole countryside discovered, as he was digging, more than a bushel of satellenas of finest silver, which had been waiting for him maybe 1,000 years or more. And it was because he noted this want of equity that Aristotle declared that the more subject a man is to understanding, the less subject he is to fortune. And I affirm that inheritance by will or by succession oftener comes to the bad than to the good, and of this I will not bring any evidence, but let each man turn his eyes round his own neighbourhood, and he will perceive that of which I speak not, so as to cast no smirch on any. Would that it were God's pleasure that what the Provencal desired should come to pass, that whoso is not heir of the excellence should lose the inheritance of the possessions. And I affirm that gain is precisely that which comes oftener to the bad than to the good, for illegitimate gains never come to the good at all, because they reject them. What good man will ever seek gain by force or by fraud? It were impossible, for by the very choice of the unlawful undertaking he would cease to be good. And lawful gains rarely come to the good, because, since much anxious care is needful thereto, and the anxious care of the good man is directed to weightier matters, rarely does the good man give sufficient attention thereto. Wherefore it is clear that in every way the advent of these riches is iniquitous, and therefore our Lord called them iniquitous when he said, Make to yourselves friends of the money of iniquity, inviting and encouraging men to liberality in benefactions, which are the begetters of friends. And how fair an exchange does he make who gives of these most imperfect things in order to have and to gain perfect things, such as are the hearts of worthy men. And this market is open every day. Verily, this merchandise is unlike others, for when the thought is to purchase one man by benefaction, thousands are purchased by it. And who has not Alexander in his heart even yet for his royal benefactions? Who has not the good King of Castile in his heart, or Saladin, or the good Marquess of Monferrato, or the good Count of Toulouse, or Bertram de Born, or Galeazzo of Montefeltro, when mention is made of their donations? Truly not only those who would gladly do the like, but they who would sooner die than do it, love their memory. Chapter 12. As has been said, the imperfection of riches may be observed not only in their undiscerning advent, but preeminently in their perilous growth, and therefore the text makes mention only of that wherein the defect may be most eagerly perceived, saying of them that, how much soever gathered, they not only give no rest but create more thirst, so as to make folk still more defective and imperfect. And here be it known that defective things may harbor their defects in such fashion that they appear not at first sight, the imperfection hiding under a pretext of perfection, or they may so harbor them as completely to reveal them, so that the imperfection is recognized openly on the surface. And those things which at first conceal their defects are the most dangerous, because in many cases we cannot be on our guard against them, as we see in the instance of a traitor who in appearance shows himself a friend, so that he begets in us a confidence in him, and beneath the pretext of friendship he hides the defect of enmity. And it is in this fashion that riches are dangerously imperfect in their growth, for submitting certain things to us which they promise, they actually bring the contrary. The false traitoresses ever promise to make him who gathers them full of satisfaction when they have been amassed up to a certain sum, and with this promise they lead the human will to the vice of avarice. And this is why Boethius in that of consolation calls them perilous, saying: Ah me, who was he who first dug out the weights of hidden gold, and the stones that sought to hide themselves, those precious perils? The false traitoresses promise, if it be well considered, to remove every thirst and every want, and to bring satiety and sufficiency. For this is what they do at first to every man, confidently fixing this promise at a certain measure of their growth; and then when they are amassed to that point, in place of satiety and of refreshment, they give and produce the thirst of a feverish bosom and not to be endured; and in the place of sufficiency they offer a new limit, that is to say, a greater quantity to long for, and together with it fear and great concern for what has already been acquired, so that verily they give no quiet, but multiply care, which without them was not there before. And therefore says Tully in that of the Paradox denouncing riches: as to their money and their splendid mansions, and their wealth and their lordship, and the delights by which they are chiefly attracted, never in truth have I ranked them amongst things good or desirable, inasmuch as I saw for a certainty that in the abundance of these things men longed most for the very things wherein they abounded. For never is the thirst of cupidity filled nor sated. And not only are they tortured by the longing to increase their possessions, but they are also tortured by fear of losing them. And all these words are Tully's, and so they stand in that book which has been mentioned. And for further witness to this imperfection, behold Boethius declaring in that of consolation: though the goddess of riches should bestow as much as the sand rolled by the wind-tossed sea, or as many as the stars that shine, the human race will not cease to wail. And since it is fitting to gather yet more evidence to bring this to proof, let us pass by all that Solomon and his father cried out against them, all that Seneca, especially in writing to Lucilius, all that Horace, all that Juvenal, and briefly all that every writer, every poet, and all that the truthful divine Scripture cries out against these false harlots, full of all defects, and that our faith may be drawn from our own eyes, let us give heed to the life of them who chase them, and see in what security they live when they have gathered of them, and how content they are, how reposeful; and what else, day by day, imperils and slays cities, countries, and single persons so much as the new amassing of wealth by any one. Which amassing reveals new longings, the goal of which may not be reached without wrong to some one. And what else is the one and the other reason, I mean the canonical and the civil, intended to cure so much as to make defence against the greed which grows as riches are amassed? Verily the one and the other reason manifests it sufficiently if we read their beginnings, I mean the beginning of their Scripture. Oh, how manifest, nay, rather how most manifest, is that in their growth they are utterly imperfect, since naught save imperfection can spring from them when they are gathered together; and this it is that the text affirms. But here by way of difficulty arises a question which we must not omit to ask and to answer. Some caviller against the truth may say that if riches are imperfect and therefore base, because as they are acquired the longing for them increases, by like reason knowledge should be imperfect and base, since in the acquiring of it the longing for it doth ever increase. Wherefore Seneca says, "Had I one foot in the grave, I should wish to learn." But it is not true that knowledge is made base by imperfection. Therefore by the destruction of the consequent, the increase of longing does not produce baseness in knowledge. That knowledge is perfect is manifest from the Philosopher in the sixth of the Ethics, who says: "Knowledge is a perfect account of things which are certain." To this question a brief answer must be given, but first we must see whether in the acquisition of knowledge the longing for it does so expand as is asserted in the question, and whether it is for a reason for which I assert that not only in the acquisition of knowledge and of wealth, but in every acquisition, human desire dilates, though in different ways, which reason is this, that the supreme longing of everything, and that first given to it by nature, is to return to its first principle. And inasmuch as God is the first principle of our souls, and hath made them like to himself, even as it is written, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness," the soul itself most chiefly longs to return to him. And like a pilgrim who is travelling on a road where he hath never been before, who believes that every house which he sees from afar is the hostel, and finding that it is not, directs his belief to another, and so from house to house until he comes to the hostel, even so our soul, so soon as it enters upon the new and never yet made journey of life, directs its eyes to the goal of its supreme good, and therefore whatever it sees that appears to have some good in it, it thinks to be it. And because its knowledge is at first imperfect, through having no experience or instruction, little goods appear great to it, and therefore it begins first from them in its longing. And so we see little children intensely longing for an apple, and then going on further, longing for a little bird, and then further on longing for fine clothes, and then a horse, and then a mistress, and then wealth, but not much, and then enormous. And this comes to pass because in none of these things does he find that for which he is ever searching, but believes he will find it further on. Wherefore we may perceive that one desirable thing stands in front of the other before the eyes of our soul, something after the fashion of a pyramid, wherein the smallest part first covers all the rest, and is as it were the apex of the supreme object of longing, which is God, as it were the base of all the rest. Wherefore the further we proceed from the apex toward the base, the greater do objects of our longing appear, and this is why in the process of acquisition the longings of men become more capacious one after the other. But in truth we may lose this way in error, just as we may lose the paths of earth, for even as from one city to another there must needs be a best and straightest way, and another which ever recedes therefrom, to wit the one which goes in the opposite direction, and many others, some departing less from it and some approaching it less, so in human life are divers paths, of which one is the truest and another the falsest, and certain less false and certain less true. And even as we see that the path which goeth straightest to the city fulfilleth the longing and giveth rest after the toil, and that which goeth the contrary never accomplisheth it, and may never give rest, so it cometh to pass in our life that he who taketh the right path reacheth the goal and hath rest, but he who goeth astray never reacheth it, but with great toil of his mind ever gazeth before him with greedy eyes. Wherefore, although this discourse doth not fully answer the question raised above, yet doth it at least clear the way for the answer, for it maketh us perceive that every longing of ours dilateth not after one same fashion. But since this chapter is somewhat protracted, the answer to the question must be given in a new chapter, wherein will be ended the whole disputation which it is our present purpose to make against riches. Chapter 13. In answer to the question, I affirm that the desire of knowledge cannot be properly said to increase, although, as has been declared, it dilates in a certain fashion. For that which properly speaking increases is always one; the desire for knowledge is not always one, but is many; and when one ends, another succeeds, so that properly speaking, its dilating is not an increasing but a succession of great things to small. For if I desire to know the elements of natural things, the moment I know them this desire is completed and ended, and if I then desire to know what each of these elements is and how it exists, this is another new desire. Nor by the access of this am I bereft of the perfection to which the other led me, and this dilating is not the cause of imperfection but of greater perfection. But that of riches is properly an increasing, for it is always one only, so that here we can detect no succession of goals reached and perfections realized. And if the adversary should say that as the desire to know the elements of natural things is one and the desire to know what they are is another, so the desire for 100 marks is one and the desire for 1,000 another, I answer that it is not true. For 100 is a part of 1,000, and is related to it as part of a line to the whole line along which we proceed by one sole motion, and there is no succession there, nor perfected motion in any part. But to know which are the elements of natural things and to know what each of them is are not parts of one another, but are related as different lines along which you cannot proceed by one motion, but when the motion of one is complete, the motion of the other succeeds. And thus it appears that knowledge is not, as laid down in the question, to be considered imperfect because of the desire for knowledge, as riches are because of the desire for them. For in the desire for knowledge desires are successively accomplished and brought to perfection, and in the desire for riches it is not so that the question is solved and does not hold. It is true that the opponent may stay cavil and say that although many desires are satisfied in the acquisition of knowledge, yet we never accomplish the ultimate one, which is something like the imperfection of a desire which, remaining one and the same, never comes to an end. Here again we answer that this counter assertion is not true, namely that the ultimate desire is never accomplished, for our natural desires, as shown above in the third treatise, go down to a certain limit, and the desire of knowledge is a natural one, so that a certain limit satisfies it, although few, because of the ill path they take, complete the journey. And he who understands the commentator, in the third of the Soul, understands this from him, and therefore Aristotle, in the 10th of the Ethics, speaking against the poet Simonides, says that man should draw himself to divine things the most he may, wherein he shows that our power contemplates a certain limit. And in the first of the Ethics he says that the disciplined man requires to know the certainty of things in the degree wherein their nature admits of certainty. Wherein he shows that not only should a limit be contemplated on the side of the man who desires knowledge, but on the side of the desired object of knowledge. And that is why Paul says we are not to know more than is fitting to know, but to know in measure. So that in whatever way the desire for knowledge is taken, whether in general or in particular, it reaches perfection. And therefore perfect knowledge has a notable perfection, and its perfection is not lost by the desire for it, as in the case of accursed riches. And how these be hurtful in their possession we are now briefly to show, for this is the third note of their imperfection. Their possession may be seen to be hurtful by two reasons: one, that it is the cause of evil; the other, that it is the privation of good. It is the cause of evil, because by mere watchfulness it makes the possessor fearful and hateful. How great is the terror of him who knows that he has wealth about him, as he journeys, and as he stays, not only waking but sleeping, lest he lose not only his possessions, but his life for his possessions' sake. Well do the wretched merchants know it who traverse the world, whom the very leaves which the wind tosses make to tremble when they are carrying their riches with them; and when they are without them full of security, they shorten their way by song and discourse. And therefore the sage says, if the wayfarer had entered on his journey empty, he would sing in the face of the robbers. And this is what Lucan means to say in the 5th book when he commends poverty for its security, saying: O secure ease of the poor life, O ye narrow homes and huts, O wealth of the gods not yet understood. To what temples and to what fortifications could this ever chance, not to know any tumult of fear when the hand of Caesar knocks? And this Lucan says when he tells how Caesar came by night to the hut of the fisherman Amyclas to cross the Adriatic Sea. And what hatred is that which everyone bears to the possessor of wealth, whether through envy or through desire to seize the possessions. Verily it is so great that many times the counter to the tenderness he owes, the son schemes the father's death. And of this the Latins have most great and manifest examples both in the region of Po and in the region of Tiber. And there Boethius in the 2nd of his Consolation says: Verily avarice makes men hated. Also their possession is the negation of good, for, when they are possessed, liberality is not practised, which is a virtue; and virtue is a perfect good and makes men illustrious and loved, which may not be achieved by possessing wealth, but by relinquishing the possession of it. Wherefore Boethius in the same book says: Money is only good when transferred to others by the practice of liberality; it is no longer possessed. Wherefore the baseness of riches is manifest enough by reason of all their characteristics, and so a man of right appetite and of true knowledge never loves them, and not loving them does not unite himself to them, but ever wishes them to be far removed from him, save as they be ordained to some necessary service. And this is reasonable, because the perfect can never unite with the imperfect. And so we see that the curved line can never unite with the straight, and if there be any union, it is not of line with line, but of point with point. And therefore it follows that the mind which is upright, to wit in appetite, and true, to wit in knowledge, is not undone by losing them, as the text lays down at the end of this section. And by this effect the text purposes to prove that they are a running stream remote from the upright tower of reason or of nobleness, and thereby that these riches cannot take away nobleness from him who has it. And this is the method of disputing and refuting pursued in the present Ode against Riches. Section 17.